Marcus Webb's arthritic hands trembled as he watched the emergency broadcast. New Nairobi gone. 2 billion voices silenced in an afternoon because of a zoning violation. His daughter's last message still blinked unread on his datapad. He looked down at the maintenance schedule for Concordat Prime's waste reclamation system, and for the first time in 3 centuries of civilized behavior, humanity's carefully buried rage began calculating trajectories. The cramped janitor's quarters smelled like industrial cleaner and recycled air. Marcus sat on the edge of his cot, the photograph of Sarah taped to the wall beside him showing a woman with his same tired eyes but her mother's hopeful smile. 23 years old in that picture, standing in front of the new Nairobi settlement sign, dirt on her cheeks, pure joy radiating from her face. The Concordat's official statement droned from his datapad speakers. Ambassador Velkoth's translated voice carried that peculiar clicking undertone the Zalathi couldn't quite eliminate. Regrettable necessity, unauthorized expansion beyond designated zones. Article 4471B Enforcement Protocols mandated immediate corrective action. Corrective action, 2 billion souls reduced to bureaucratic terminology. Marcus's coffee cup sat forgotten beside him, surface rippling from the tremor in his hands. Not arthritis this time, something older, something the Concordat thought they'd bred out of humanity over 3 centuries of compliance training, conflict resolution seminars, and mandatory meditation sessions. His mind replayed Sarah's voice from last week's call. "Dad, you should see the schools we built. Real earth and sky, not recycled station air. The kids are learning to farm. We're actually building something that matters." The unread message icon pulsed. Timestamp, 14:47 station time. New Nairobi's orbital strike occurred at 14:52. 5 minutes of his daughter's final words, and he couldn't make himself touch the screen. 72 hours later, Marcus stood in sublevel 43's waste management control room, surrounded by pipes that carried the station's biological refuse to processing centers. The space hummed with machinery that nobody important ever thought about. The Concordat's grand civilization ran on systems they considered beneath their notice, maintained by humans they'd barely acknowledged for decades. Elena Vasquez was already there when he arrived, her nurse's uniform still crisp despite the tears tracking through her makeup. She had schematics spread across the monitoring console, station layouts, ventilation systems, biological processing flowcharts. "Couldn't sleep either?" Marcus asked, voice hollow. Elena didn't look up. "My son was studying xenobiology, 14 years old. He wanted to understand them better." She laughed, a broken sound. "He died trying to understand the species that vaporized him for being in the wrong postal code." They stood in silence, both staring at the schematics, neither speaking the words that hung between them like radiation. Marcus pointed to a junction on the diagram. Biological waste processing connects directly to ventilation sublevel 9 through 12. Environmental controls route through maintenance access. Elena's finger traced another line. Nobody monitors what goes into the medical waste disposal. "OSHA would shut this whole operation down," Marcus muttered, dark irony coating every word. "Cross-contamination risks, no backup safeties. One tired janitor could poison half the station." Elena met his eyes. The question passed between them wordlessly. "My daughter's last message," Marcus said quietly. "I still haven't opened it." "Don't," Elena whispered. "Once you hear it, you can't unhear it. Can't pretend there's still hope." Over the next 48 hours, 4 others found their way to the water treatment plant on sublevel 31. Not through planning or recruitment. They simply gravitated there like debris caught in a dying star's pool. David Chen arrived first, the head cook whose hands had prepared meals for Concordat dignitaries for 20 years. His wife had retired to New Nairobi last year. "Wanted to see real sunlight before she died," he said, staring at the purification tanks. "She got her wish, I suppose. 5 minutes of it before the sky caught fire." Priya Kapoor came next, the educator who taught 3 generations of human children to be good galactic citizens. Her grandchildren had just started school on New Nairobi. "I taught them to be kind," she said, voice breaking, to trust the system, to believe in peaceful resolution. She pulled up her datapad, showing lesson plans on conflict mediation. I killed them with lessons. James Morrison, the plumber, arrived without speaking, just nodded and started examining the pressurization systems, his bulky frame moving with surprising precision through the tight spaces. When Alina finally asked about his connection to New Nairobi, he said simply, "My brother, his family, don't make me count." Ruth Goldman appeared last, the station's senior accountant. She carried printouts, resource allocation records, supply chain manifests, personnel access logs. "If we do this," she said without preamble, "they'll call us terrorists." Marcus looked at the 5 faces surrounding him. Broken people, ordinary people, cooks and teachers and nurses and plumbers, the invisible infrastructure of the Concordat's grand civilization. "They already called us extinct," he replied. That evening, alone in his quarters, Marcus finally pressed the message icon. Sarah's face appeared, pixelated and breaking up. "Dad, if you're hearing this," static crackled, "emergency protocols activated. Don't let them make you forget what we were. Not soldiers, not monsters, just..." The image froze, her mouth open mid-word. Then nothing but white light consuming the frame. The message ended at 14:51, 1 minute before impact. Marcus closed the datapad with hands that no longer shook. He looked at himself in the small mirror above his sink, a 67-year-old janitor with thinning gray hair and age spots on his hands. The Concordat saw a harmless old man pushing a mop. They were about to learn what 3 centuries of buried rage looked like when it found purpose. He messaged the group, "We tried being civilized for 300 years. Alina replied instantly, "Not anymore." They dispersed to their stations. No dramatic speeches, no rallying cries, no patriotic music swelling in the background. Just quiet purpose, ancient skills, and tears that wouldn't stop falling. The Concordat Prime's morning shift began like any other, completely unaware that their perfectly maintained systems had just become weapons in the hands of those they'd trained to be invisible. Alina's hands shook as she prepared the injection at 300 hours. The medical ward's sterile lighting made everything look corpse-pale, including her reflection in the pharmaceutical cabinet's glass door. Counselor Thexfer slept in Recovery Room 3, post-surgical observation, for what the Zalathi considered routine cardiovascular maintenance. He'd trusted her completely during prep, even made that clicking sound they used for laughter when she'd checked his vitals. "Dear Alina," he'd said in his halting English, 12 years you care for me, like family, yes. Like family." She drew the compound into the syringe with practiced precision. To any observer, it looked like standard postoperative medication, anti-inflammatory, coagulation stabilizer, cellular regeneration booster. The Zalathi physiology responded beautifully to Terran-derived medicines. That's what made this so easy. And so unforgivable. The mixture contained 40 ccs of prescribed medication and 3 ccs of a chelating agent that would bind to Thexfer's copper-based blood cells and simulate Falari fever, a common Zalathi illness. Fatal in elderly patients, completely natural-looking. His own immune system would kill him while she documented every symptom as textbook pathology. Alina entered the recovery room. Thexfer's breathing was steady, his double-lidded eyes closed. Peaceful. She'd kept him comfortable through 2 previous surgeries, held his hand during moments of fear, explained every procedure in simple terms he could understand. She administered the injection into his IV port with the same gentle efficiency she'd shown for 12 years. Then she walked to the supply closet, closed the door, and vomited into the medical waste disposal. Her whole body heaved, but she kept it silent, professional even in this. When the shaking subsided, she cleaned the bin, sanitized the floor, washed her hands twice. Old habits from nursing school: always leave your workspace clean. Her datapad buzzed. "Marcus, first dose administered." She typed back with trembling fingers, "Yes, Thexfer, 6 hours, I hate us." Marcus replied immediately, "Good. Never stop hatting what we're becoming. Elena slid down the wall until she sat on the pristine floor, arms wrapped around her knees, silent sobs racking her shoulders. Through the door, she could hear Thexva's monitor beeping steadily. For now. 3 sublevels down, David Chen's kitchen gleamed under the harsh fluorescence. He'd arrived at 400 to begin prep work for the Concordat Council's welcoming feast, 8 visiting dignitaries from the Outer Rim arriving to discuss the unfortunate New Nairobi incident and preventing future human misunderstandings. The menu featured Terran delicacies. The council loved experiencing human culture, especially the cuisine. David had won 3 Excellence Awards for his cultural bridge building through culinary arts. He laid out the ingredients with mechanical precision. Terran black truffles, aged for 14 months, infused with oils that created an umami depth the Zalasi found intoxicating. He'd spent 2 years perfecting this recipe, served it at his anniversary dinner before his wife retired to New Nairobi. The earthy flavor, she'd said, eyes closed in pleasure. It tastes like home. Home was ash now. David's hands moved through familiar motions, slicing, dicing, preparing the truffle reduction that would coat the Zalathi protein dish. To human biology, the truffles were harmless, delicious even, but Zalathi neural chemistry processed the specific terpene compounds differently. Cumulative exposure over 72 hours caused progressive neurological breakdown, seizures, paralysis, death. Completely undetectable until the cascade began. He'd serve this meal today, tomorrow, the day after, each portion carefully calculated, each plate a masterpiece of presentation. A junior cook entered. "Chef, you're crying, are you okay?" David blinked, touching his wet cheek. "Onions," he lied, gesturing to the cutting board that held truffles, not onions. The junior cook nodded, uncomfortable, and retreated to prep station 2. David continued working. He arranged the garnish with artistic precision, microgreens, edible flowers, a drizzle of reduced wine. The Concordat Council would photograph these plates, post them to Galactic social networks, praise the wonderful human chef who shares his cultural heritage so generously. Through the kitchen monitor, he watched them arrive at 1900 hours. 8 dignitaries in formal robes, accompanied by their aides and security. The head counselor, a female Zalasi named Severith, had personally sent him a message of appreciation last week. David served the first course himself, as tradition dictated. Terran truffles with wild mushroom reduction, he announced, a recipe from my home region. Severith inhaled the aroma. "Exquisite, Chef Chen, you honor us with your skill." "The honor is mine," David replied, voice steady despite the screaming in his head. They ate slowly, savoring each bite, praising the earthy complexity, the subtle notes, the way the flavors lingered. "You must teach our culinary academy this technique," Severith said between bites. David smiled. "Of course, counselor, I'd be delighted to share everything I know." He returned to the kitchen and turned off the monitor. Couldn't watch any more. His hands kept moving through muscle memory, prepping tomorrow's course, calculating portions, ensuring consistency. In the maintenance tunnels of sublevel 19, James Morrison wedged his bulk through access spaces designed for maintenance drones. His knees screamed against the metal grating. 40 years of plumbing had destroyed his cartilage, but he knew pipe systems the way poets knew meter. Section 7, Alpha's life support, ran through Junction Point Delta 9. Military command occupied that section, the officers who'd authorized the New Nairobi strike, who'd calculated acceptable losses, who'd filed the paperwork that murdered his brother's family. James rewired the oxygen-nitrogen mixture controls with surgical precision, his thick fingers surprisingly deft. The adjustment was subtle, shifting ratios by 3% every 6 hours, too slow to trigger automatic alerts, too gradual for the monitoring AI to flag as anomalous. In 72 hours, Section 7 Alpha would suffocate. Emergency systems would mysteriously fail because he'd already sabotaged the backups. 17 different redundancies, all compromised. 147 Concordat military officers would die gasping in the dark. He left tool marks deliberately, making it look like sloppy maintenance, not sabotage. The Concordat had never respected human, labor class, work enough to inspect closely. They saw James as a simple plumber, not an engineer with 40 years of experience in life support systems. 30 years of plumbing school for this, he muttered, dark humor his only defense against what his hands were doing. He marked Section 7 Alpha on his datapad, 72 hours until inspection required. In the education center, Priya Kapoor uploaded subroutines disguised as updated curriculum modules. Her teaching certification granted deep system access. The Concordat trusted educators implicitly. The code would activate in 96 hours, flooding every screen on Concordat Prime with footage from New Nairobi's final moments. Every monitor, every datapad, every public display, endless loops of children running, mothers shielding infants, the moment the sky turned white. She recorded her own message to accompany the footage. This is what you called regulatory compliance. These are the faces of your zoning enforcement. Remember them. Priya's hands didn't shake as she worked. The trembling had stopped after she'd cried herself empty 3 days ago. Now there was only cold purpose, and the faces of her grandchildren burned into her memory. Let the Concordat watch what they'd done. Let them see it on every surface until the images seared into their minds the way her grief had seared into her soul. She uploaded the final sequence and logged out, erasing her digital fingerprints with the same methodical care she'd once used to grade papers. The station hummed around them all, oblivious. 40 million souls living their lives, completely unaware that 6 broken humans had just weaponized the very systems that kept them alive. Councillor Thexver died at 8:47 hours on day 8. Elena stood beside his bed, holding his hand as his breathing became labored, as the copper-based blood cells crystallized in his vessels, as his body temperature spiked to fatal levels. The monitors screamed alerts that she silenced with practiced efficiency. Elena, he rasped, his translator barely functioning. What happening? Falari fever, counselor, she said softly, genuinely. I'm so sorry, we are doing everything we can. His double-lidded eyes searched her face, confused, frightened, like her son must have looked in those final moments on New Nairobi. 14 years old, studying xenobiology, probably wondering why the sky was burning. Thexver's hand squeezed hers weakly. Thank you, dear friend. He stopped breathing at 8:51. Elena documented the time of death, noting all symptoms consistent with Falari fever in elderly Zalathi patients. Textbook pathology. She filed the report with medical administration, marked the bed for sterilization, and requested the next patient assignment. 3 more Concordat officials had been admitted overnight with similar symptoms. The medical chief, a Zalathi named Krevoth, found her in the medication preparation room. Nurse Vasquez, your expertise is needed. This outbreak is unprecedented. 4 cases in 3 days. I'll do everything I can, Elena said, meeting his eyes without flinching. She spent the next 6 hours treating patients while administering carefully calculated doses that would ensure they never recovered. Each injection delivered with gentle efficiency, each comforting word genuine even as she escalated their conditions. A young Zalathi female, barely into adulthood, clutched Elena's hand. Am I dying? Rest now, Elena whispered, smoothing the alien's crest with maternal tenderness. I'm here with you. The girl's breathing steadied as the sedative took effect, unaware that the same IV carried compounds that would stop her heart by morning. Elena filed another perfect medical report, everything documented, everything lethal. Her internal monologue screamed questions she couldn't answer. Was Sarah gentle when she died? Did she have time to be scared? Did anyone hold her hand? She pushed the thoughts down and moved to the next patient. Section 7, Alpha lost atmosphere at 4:12 hours on day 10. Marcus sat in his janitorial closet 3 sublevels away, listening to emergency frequencies on a scanner he wasn't supposed to have. The screams came through crackling static, choking sounds, desperate pleas in multiple languages as 147 Concordat military officers realized their air was turning to poison. Emergency protocols failed. Backup systems failed. Every redundancy James had sabotaged performing exactly as designed, which was to say, not at all. The sounds lasted 11 minutes before silence. James arrived at Marcus's closet at 4:28, his face the color of old concrete. He said nothing, just stood in the doorway, hands hanging limp at his sides. "It's done," he finally whispered. "God forgive me, it's done." Marcus looked up from his scanner. God's been dead since New Nairobi. They sat in silence, listening to the station's emergency response teams scrambling. Investigators would find corroded seals, fatigued equipment, systemic maintenance failures. They'd find exactly what Marcus had spent 3 days planting, evidence of gradual deterioration in human-maintained systems that the Concordat had neglected to properly oversee. Marcus filed his maintenance report at 6:30 hours. Catastrophic seal failure in Section 7 Alpha life support. Possible equipment fatigue due to deferred replacement schedules. Recommend immediate audit of all critical systems maintained by human personnel. The irony was beautiful. He was literally telling them the truth, just not the version they'd understand until too late. Investigation teams arrived by 800. Marcus showed them his maintenance logs, pointed out the wear patterns he'd artificially created, expressed appropriate concern about budget constraints affecting equipment replacement. The lead investigator, a Zalathi engineer, nodded gravely. "This is what happens when corners are cut. Thank you for your diligence, Mr. Webb." Marcus watched them seal Section 7 Alpha as a disaster site. 147 bodies would be recovered over the next 48 hours. The Concordat would file reports about administrative negligence, budget reallocation, improved oversight of essential systems. They would never suspect. Humans were too civilized now. In the main galley, David watched the news feeds while prepping the evening meal. The Falari fever outbreak had reached critical mass. 50 dead, then 200, then 4,000 by day 11. The medical community was baffled. Unprecedented spread, unusually virulent strain, mortality rate climbing toward 94%. Ruth entered through the service corridor, her accountant's posture rigid with tension. "David, the resource allocation reports show." "I don't want to know the numbers," he interrupted, hands moving mechanically through vegetable prep. Ruth told him anyway. She always had to tell the truth, even when it hurt. Especially when it hurt. 14,000 infected as of 1,300 hours, mortality rate at 94%, concentrated primarily in government and military sectors, the ones who eat in the administrative dining halls. The ones David fed personally. His knife slipped, nicking his finger. Blood welled up, mixing with the juice from the vegetables. He watched it spread across the cutting board, diluting to pink, then nothing. "My wife loved when I cooked," he said to nobody in particular. "Sunday dinners were her favorite. She'd sit at the counter and watch me work, telling me about her week." Ruth stood silent, understanding there was nothing to say. "I'm making the same menu today that I served the council on day 1, David continued, voice hollow. "Terran truffles. They requested it specifically, said it was the best meal they'd had in years." He plated the dishes with the same artistic precision he'd shown for 20 years. Microgreens arranged just so, sauce drizzled in elegant spirals. Each plate a masterpiece that would photograph beautifully for the Galactic social networks. Each plate carrying cumulative neurotoxins that would push infected Zalathi past the point of recovery. 16,000 by dinner service, Ruth said quietly, 22,000 by morning. The cascading failures are accelerating. David's tears splashed onto the cutting board. He didn't wipe them away, just kept working. kept cooking, kept killing with the same hands that had once prepared anniversary dinners and birthday cakes. In her administrative office, Ruth stared at the spreadsheets that told the real story. She'd altered supply chain records going back 6 months, creating a paper trail that blamed contaminated food shipments from Concordat-approved suppliers. She'd manufactured budget cuts that explained the deferred maintenance in Section 7 Alpha. She'd built a narrative from financial records that pointed every investigation away from 6 grieving humans and toward the Concordat's own systemic failures. The accounting was perfect, the numbers balanced in ways that would satisfy any audit. Except for the one ledger she kept private, 40 million alien lives, 2 billion human ones, a debt that could never balance, an equation that had no solution. She transferred funds to human survivor colonies, reparations extracted from Concordat accounts in amounts small enough to avoid detection but large enough to matter. Blood money laundered through bureaucratic channels, helping rebuild what the Concordat had destroyed. "The numbers don't balance," she whispered to her empty office. "They never would." By day 12, Concordat Prime's medical facilities had collapsed under the weight of the dying. The station administration declared a health emergency. Military command, or what remained of it, implemented quarantine protocols. And 6 ordinary humans continued their shifts, maintaining the systems that kept 40 million aliens alive. Until they didn't. Day 13 arrived at 1200 hours with the screaming of alarms that nobody could silence. Every screen on Concordat Prime activated simultaneously, view screens in quarters, monitors in medical bays, displays in command centers, even the advertising panels in commercial districts. Priya's virus had awakened exactly on schedule. The footage began without warning. New Nairobi from orbit, the settlement sprawling across green valleys under an atmosphere that looked almost like Earth's. Then the Concordat enforcement vessels appeared, their weapons already charging. The camera, someone's personal recorder, shaky and desperate, showed streets from ground level. A mother grabbed her children's hands, running toward shelters that wouldn't save them. An elderly man stood frozen, looking up at the sky with the confusion of someone who couldn't comprehend what was happening. A group of teenagers helped a woman in a wheelchair, shouting directions to each other, faces streaked with tears and determination. Then the flash, white light consuming everything. The image pixelated, broke apart, reformed just long enough to show ash and fire before cutting to black. The loop started again, and again, and again. Text overlay in 17 galactic languages. This is what you called regulatory compliance. Article 4471B enforcement. 2 billion violations of your zoning ordinance. Watch what civilization looks like. In the Concordat Council chambers, Councillor Severith watched the footage play on every surface. Her hands trembled, the first neurological symptoms of David's carefully cultivated poison. Around her, other councillors sat in stunned silence, some weeping, others arguing, all of them watching children die over and over on screens they couldn't turn off. "Shut it down," someone screamed. "Override the system." But Priya had coded the virus with 20 years of teaching experience in network architecture. It wouldn't stop, couldn't stop. Every attempt to override it triggered another copy, another screen, another loop of those final moments. Throughout Concordat Prime, 40 million aliens confronted what their government had done. Some turned away, some wept, some finally, terribly understood. But understanding came too late. In the education center, Priya deleted her user credentials from the station database. She became a ghost in the system, no employment record, no residential assignment, no digital footprint. Just another casualty of the chaos consuming Concordat Prime. She watched the footage play on her terminal one last time, saw her granddaughter's face in the crowd of running children for just 3 frames before the white light swallowed everything. "Now you know," she whispered to empty screens and walked away. Day 14 brought cascading failures that transformed Concordat Prime from a thriving station into a tomb. Life support flickered in 17 sectors. Medical facilities reported mortality rates approaching total collapse. Command structure had disintegrated, most officers dead in Section 7 Alpha, the survivors overwhelmed by crises they had no framework to address. 26,000 dead from the Falari fever outbreak that wasn't Falari fever at all. Another 8,000 from respiratory failures, equipment malfunctions, and the thousands small sabotages that James had woven into the station's infrastructure like landmines waiting for the right moment to detonate. Marcus stood in emergency evacuation Bay 7 with the others. Thousands of aliens scrambled for escape pods, their organized society degrading into pure survival instinct, families separated, children crying, the civilized Concordat reverting to animal desperation as their perfect station died around them. The 6 humans, marked as essential maintenance personnel, had priority evacuation clearance. A bitter irony that would have made Marcus laugh if he still remembered how. Elena hesitated at the pod entrance, looking back toward the medical bay. I should stay, people are dying, I'm a nurse, I should. That's the point, Marcus said quietly. Not like this, Elena's voice cracked. I poisoned them, but I can't just leave them to. You made your choices, Ruth said, not unkindly. We all did, now make this one. Elena looked at each of them, her face a portrait of someone who'd shattered and tried to glue the pieces back wrong. I can't, I won't die clean, but maybe I can die doing something that matters. She turned and walked back toward the medical bay, her nurse's uniform disappearing into the crowd of desperate aliens seeking help she'd already ensured wouldn't come. David started after her. We can't just. Marcus grabbed his arm. She made her choice. We don't have time. James, Priya, Ruth, and David boarded their pods. Marcus stood at the threshold of his, looking back at the station that had been his home for 43 years. He thought about staying, thought about drowning with the ship he'd scuttled. But Sarah's voice echoed, don't let them win. Dying with them would be letting them win. He boarded the pod and sabotaged the engine controls before launch, overriding the automatic navigation that would carry him to safety. The pod ejected with minimal thrust, drifting rather than fleeing. He wanted to watch. Through the porthole, Concordat Prime looked like a dying star. Atmosphere vented from hull breaches. Escape ships fled in chaotic trajectories. Debris clouds formed as internal explosions tore through compromised sections. The station that had housed 40 million souls was hemorrhaging them into the void. Marcus's communication panel lit up with emergency channels. Hundreds of voices screaming, begging, pleading. Mayday, mayday, this is Medical Transport 7. We have critical patients. Need immediate docking clearance. Section 19 is collapsing. We need structural support. Anyone with engineering access. My children are in educational sublevel 4. Please, someone respond. Marcus's hand hovered over the transmit button. He knew the station better than anyone, could guide them to stable sections, could coordinate evacuations, could save thousands with the knowledge he'd spent decades accumulating. His finger pulled back. Sarah hadn't had anyone to save her. 2 billion humans had screamed into the void, and the Concordat had filed paperwork. The voices on the emergency channels grew more desperate, more panicked. Then, one by one, they cut out. Silenced by vacuum, by system failures, by the cascading collapse that 6 ordinary people had orchestrated with cleaning supplies and cooking ingredients and maintenance schedules. Ruth's final casualty estimate appeared on his datapad, 40,147,000 dead or critical, station unsalvageable, estimated total loss 96% within 48 hours. 40 million lives for 2 billion, the math still didn't balance. It never would. Marcus pulled up the message from Sarah one last time, watched her face freeze mid-sentence, watched the white light consume her. He'd watched it 400 times now, memorized every pixel, every frame, every moment of her final second. Behind him, Concordat Prime's fusion core destabilized. Someone had finally reached it, tried to execute emergency shutdown protocols, but James had been very thorough. The safeties failed, the magnetic containment failed, the station's heart became a miniature sun. The explosion was silent in vacuum, but Marcus saw it reflected in his porthole, a bloom of light that briefly illuminated the debris field brighter than day. Metal and bodies and dreams vaporized in an instant of fusion fire. Exactly like New Nairobi. Marcus whispered into the silence of his drifting pod, "We tried your way." The communication channels went dead, every voice silenced. The station's emergency beacon stopped transmitting. Concordat Prime ceased to exist as anything except expanding wreckage. Marcus closed his eyes, disabled his pod's distress beacon. He'd drift until rescue found him or oxygen ran out. Didn't matter which. No relief came, no satisfaction, no sense of justice served or debts paid. Just silence and the knowledge that he'd become exactly what the Concordat had feared humanity always was beneath the veneer of civilization. The pod tumbled slowly through darkness, rotating past the debris field again and again. Each rotation showed less of the station, more of the void. The wreckage spreading, dissipating, becoming just another footnote in the galaxy's long history of violence. Marcus thought about Elena, probably dead now in the medical bay she'd poisoned. About David's hands that would never cook Sunday dinner again. About Priya's deleted records and James's sabotaged systems and Ruth's unbalanced ledgers. About 6 ordinary people who'd proved that the most dangerous humans were never the soldiers. They were the ones civilization taught to be invisible. His eyes remained closed as the pod drifted into deeper darkness. The last thought before exhaustion or oxygen deprivation or simple surrender pulled him under was a question he'd never know the answer to. Was this the end of humanity's revenge, or just the beginning? The universe offered no response. Only silence. Only darkness. Only the certainty that somewhere in the wreckage, 40 million ghosts had joined 2 billion others, and nobody, human or alien, could ever claim their hands were clean again.